Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans, college football recruiting fans, college recruiting fans across the nation and around the world. This is Tim May with the Tim May Show, and I've got a guest on. I've been wanting to get on for a few weeks, but I've been letting him settle in to his new digs as one of the recruiting gurus. There's a lot of gurus out there, Mick Walker, but I would throw you immediately into that class of recruiting guru, Mick Walker of LettermenRow.com and On3.com. Welcome finally to the Tim May Show.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I don't know if guru is the appropriate title yet, but I appreciate it. I know we got a ton of guys that do a great job covering it well for Ohio State, and Lettermen Row is lucky to have two of the best of them, and Alex and Matt. And Matt's done a great job since he's came over, and Alex has brought a different element. So I'm excited to be working with those two guys, and hopefully, I guess we can have three gurus. I don't know if we need three gurus, but we can certainly try to have it.
Yeah, it's like three wise men. You need three gurus, man, to fill out the story. You know what I mean? To flesh it out. And by the way, let's just hit real quick. I mean, it looks like after another stellar week of recruiting, especially weekend, Ohio State, if it doesn't have the number one recruiting class in the country for 2025, and of course that can change from moment to moment, actually, but it's right there right now, right? I mean, this was another big week for the Buckeyes this past week.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at this class, really the only thing it's missing, and interestingly enough, is the five-star wide receiver they've been able to sign often under Brian Hartline. You've got the five-star quarterback, you've got a running back in Bo Jackson that's in state that Carlos Lachlan loved while he was at Oregon and continued to love and land eventually when he was at Ohio State. You got a tight end in Nate Roberts who worked out at camp last week and has long been the guy for Keenan Bailey in this class. Keenan Bailey made more trips out to Oklahoma than probably even the Oklahoma coaching staff who's within driving distance. And then you have a preeminent, a high end offensive tackle in Carter Lowe from Toledo. You got two standout edge rushers in Zaire Mathis and London Merritt, a linebacker in Eli Lee that can be a leader of this defense, another guy in TJ Alford that's going to be able to play right beside him and do a couple different things and be a high end athlete, and then a secondary that has one of the best safeties in the country after this weekend, and Fahim Delane, two five-star plus cornerbacks, and Devin Sanchez, Neem Offord, and then a couple of talented safeties in Deshaun Stewart and Cody Haddad. I think that's everybody. I might have. No, I did. They do have a wide receiver commit. I don't want to short him. Des Jones, he was on his official visit this weekend. He's a talented guy that should be able to play at Ohio State. But, everybody's just come to expect some five-star, the number one wide receiver in the country to end up at Ohio State. And that guy is not in the class currently. He eventually obviously could be by the end of this month or by the end of this cycle.
What's your prediction? Who is it?
I think if you're going big time wide receiver prospects, the two that we would talk about the most when it comes to the five-star type talent would probably be Vernell Brown, the third, who visited the first official visit weekend. I spoke with him afterwards. He talked really highly. Ohio State's battling all three of the in-state Florida schools there: Miami, Florida, Florida State. He's a Florida legacy, so they're battling there. But I seems like there's a continuing amount of confidence coming out that he's going to end up at Ohio State. And so that's one guy. And then the other guy would be Quincy Porter, who's Ohio State is out of Bergen Catholic in New Jersey. And Ohio State's actually battling Michigan for it. Seems like he'll go to Michigan next weekend, was at Ohio State this past weekend. And he's a lot like in that same body type of the Marvin Harrison Jr.'s, the Jeremiah Smiths, that long, lengthier guy that can play on the outside. And Ohio State isn't on a ton of those guys left in this class. So he's somebody that they're really circling on and hoping to land.
Yeah, I'm just wondering. As you look at this, Mick. I mean, obviously, it's the first time you and I've spoken on the Tim May Show, but as we're going to get into your background, your history, why in the heck a guy becomes a recruiting guru, and what is the training ground for becoming a recruiting guru in a minute. But does it still astound you a little bit about the quality uh, that Ohio State not only is attracting for visits, but attracting to commit? I mean, is as good as Ohio State's been, is it still a little bit stunning the talent they're in on and that they've already basically gotten commitments from? You follow my drift on that?
Yeah, and I think that's something that's always astounding. You look at it, there's guys that we had on the visit list that Matt and Alex had put on the visit list earlier in the spring and summer and said, hey, they're going to come on a certain weekend, and Ohio State has had to say, sorry, you can't make it, or why don't you go somewhere else just because they've got other guys they like more, or other guys they feel more confident about. So being able to tell guys that are four-star guys or guys that are going to go to other Big Ten schools that they can't come on a visit, or that that they might maybe should go visit elsewhere is a crazy thing to think about for any program. But I mean, that's the luxury Ohio State has. And yeah, I mean, but yeah, another thing is you just have to, like we talked about when we went through the class, the depth and the scope of how they do it at every position is also astounding. So
Yeah.
that both those things, when you look at it, what they do on the recruiting show, are pretty crazy to think about.
I'll tell you what's still astounding to me is how they identify guys way. I mean, I've been covering Ohio State for going on 41 seasons now. Back in the old days, back in '84 when I first started. I mean, I called every recruit I could think of, compiled lists, et cetera. You know, there weren't any recruiting services, and then along came a few guys, and it just exploded from there. But my point was, I it was always kind of interesting to me how they would recruit certain areas of a state or or parts of the country, but now they literally recruit everywhere. They're in on anybody almost who matters, right? I mean, is that soft pedaling, or is that the way it is?
No, I mean, between Mark Pantoni, Nick Murphy, Sam Patino, who came over from Alabama, Aaron Dunston, who works the on-campus recruiting director, a lot the scope of that recruiting department, and those were just the figureheads of this organization when it comes to the recruiting side of things.
Right.
You have the assistant coaches who obviously have their different contacts with high school coaches. Then you have the scouting interns, and you have the people. Last weekend, you go to the camps, and they have a whole staff of 20 people that are just recruiting and walking families and people through their visits that are at entry level positions in the recruiting department. So that recruiting department, the scouting department there is massive. And like you said, that allows them to, if there's a kid in Ohio that whether he's a Mac kid or whether he's an Ohio State kid, they'll have some type of evaluation on him. They'll have some type of eyes on him just because that's what they have to do. At a place like Ohio State, we talk about how big of a luxury and how awesome it is for them to have all these guys that they can get on campus that are so highly touted, but it doesn't happen unless you're turning over every stone and you're looking over every place. So whether it's a guy that's in Alaska or it's a guy that's in, South Florida, you need to be looking at every single guy you can, because if he's good enough to play at Ohio State, that's Mark Pantoni and Nick Murphy and Sam Petito and Aaron Dunston's job to figure out and eventually get him on campus and hopefully figure out a way to land him to come to Ohio State.
Yeah, and yet their five-star quarterback in this class is 50 minutes from campus. Tavian St. Clair went out and did a long interview with him and his coach a year ago, after he committed to Ohio State, and it's just the talent is everywhere. But don't look. What's that? Make sure you see the forest. Make sure you can see the forest and the trees, right? Because the trees sometimes have hidden gems in them, right? I mean, and Tavia St. Clair, in my opinion, is a great example of that.
Exactly. Yeah. You mentioned the 15 minutes away, but already they have a handful of guys. I can't do the quick math off the top of my head, but they have a handful of guys in the 2025 class committed, 8 guys already offered in the 2026 class
Yeah.
in state. And then when their lone commit, Chris Henry Jr. is the guy that spent a ton of time in the state of Ohio that was at Cincinnati Withrow before transferring to Mater Dei this offseason. So he's a guy that has some Ohio ties. And then last week they offered the first 2027 prospect in the state of Ohio and a wide receiver out of Heber Heights Wayne and Jameer Brown. So they do a ton of work in the state of Ohio. And that's Mark Pantoni's done a couple of different podcasts, kind of a couple of different shows talking about this, especially in the NIL area. But being able to recruit the state of Ohio, being able to lock down that area and that vicinity where you can drive to Columbus, that's a priority for them, and they continue to do a great job of that and knowing what's going on in the state of Ohio.
Yeah, I was going to say Ryan Day made a point of emphasizing that the day he was introduced as the new head coach. I mean, he'd been an interim head coach before, obviously, for Urban Meyer the first 3 games of the 2018 season. But when he was named the head coach, that was one of the in November, late November, early December. That was one of the first things he mentioned was starting in Ohio. I mean, and I think a lot of people had sensed maybe Ohio State was looking a little too far ground. I'm not sure I totally agree with that, but some people can get butthurt over different things, and he made sure that that was one of the was going to be his points of emphasis, and it has been, right? I mean, just like Tavian St. Clair. Here's what I want to get to, though, is what I was leading up to a while ago. And my question is the way Ohio State recruits, the way the big time got boys recruit Alabama, right on down the line. We're talking about identifying guys as freshmen in high school and definitely no later than sophomores in high school as growing into a 5-star dude who will help you 5 years later. That's kind of crazy when you think about it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of those positions they do a great job Wide receiver, obviously, Brian Hartline will offer some 2027s, maybe even 2028s this summer. I think he's already offered a 2028 wide receiver. So that means a guy that has yet to play a down of high school football, but that they believed in enough. So some of those positions they obviously do a great job out of early identifying, and then other positions I think you look at offensive line with Justin Fry. It's a reason why he's caught a lot of flack, I think, but he's actually really slow in this offering process. They offered a lot of 2025 prospects this spring throughout the spring evaluation period, just so you can get the full junior season, the full spring, the full everything. You'll see them work out in May, and that's when you lead into guys like Andrew Stargo, who visited this past weekend, and Henry Fanuku, who already visited last weekend, 2 weekends ago, and then some of these guys, Jackson Lloyd, who got offered this spring. All of them were offered this spring, and
Yeah,
that was because Justin Fry went out and got as much data as he could on a position that's historically shown to be the least the hardest to project to the college level, getting the
correct.
most data possible and trying to offer based off of having all that data. So yeah, they do a great job of not only doing it early, but also understanding where you have to be patient and when understanding where you have to kind of attack and when you have to wait for information to come in as well.
Yeah, exactly. A big offensive lineman, number one, who's going to be recruited by Ohio State. He better be dominating in high school, right? But then, does he project as being able to dominate against individuals or much better defensive players? That's what you've always got to in your mind. You've always got to be able to extrapolate that, right? I mean, and that's a fine talent, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that, like you mentioned, there's a lot of guys that come in. There's high school freshmen, offensive linemen that already have offers, and that's because they're 6'2", 6'3" right now. Well, in 4 years, are they going to be 6'2", 6'3" as well? Because a lot of these guys, Carter Lowe, who we mentioned, he's 6'6". Jackson Lloyd, who we mentioned, he's 6'6".
Yeah.
David Sanders Jr., who's going to visit in a couple weeks, he's 6'6". And a lot of these guys, it's hard. David Sanders Jr., even in himself, is kind of an anomaly because he's been a guy that all the scouting and ranking services have pegged as the number one offensive tackle for pretty much the whole recruiting process. And there's data that shows a lot of these guys that get drafted highly from the offensive tackle spot aren't even playing offensive tackle until maybe even college or late in their high school career. So being able to do it, look at it, kind of evaluate it, and all equal parts. And I think that's why the Ohio State, as a coaching staff, stresses the camp so much. These camp settings that they had a couple last week, they'll have a couple more this week, and then even a couple more in June 17th and 18th with 7-on-7 and 1-day camps. That getting guys on campus to evaluate them against each other, getting guys that would go against Division 7 football in Ohio to go against guys that are going at the highest level of Georgia, and seeing how everybody competes and if it's a fluke or if if everything matches the eye. So I think the whole evaluation process, yeah, it's very high quality, and you can see why Ohio State recruits at the level they do, just looking at kind of the way they do things.
Oh yeah, I think especially in the alignment area, does a guy when you get him in, he goes against a like person, does he step up or step back? I mean that's the big question. And then number two, does he even have nasty? Because you've already projected he's probably going to get there physically, but does he have the nasty factor that's going to carry him on into his third year in college and kicking rear end? And I think that is the hardest thing. I, I think offensive lineman is the hardest thing to evaluate when they're a sophomore in high school. I don't know if you agree or not, but do you? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, I think at that point, a lot of it is just how big are they? If they're already pushing 6'5" or something, then there's a projectable frame. I think a lot of that comes with the early rankings on offensive linemen. But like you said, you getting those like to like data points, whether it's a camp or in season or what you can find, are so important. Last week, if you, for example, Matt Parker did a great job of talking about this. Darius Gray is a guy out
Yeah,
of Richmond, Virginia, that got offered from Ohio State, and he's only about 6'3", 270, and he had the opportunity of his camp day getting to go against Jakeem Stewart, who is the number one prospect in 2026 and a guy that could reclassify up to 2025. He's a standout defensive lineman, and Darius Gray won his own handful of battles against Jakeem Stewart, and that obviously signals a lot to the Ohio State coaching staff. They put him through another workout after the camp and realize, hey, this is the guy we need to offer, even though you've got two guys in Ohio, and Maxwell Riley and Will Conroy, that are of a similar size. So you take the best players you can, regardless of how they kind of are size wise, and hope you figure it out. But Darius graded enough to become one of those best players at his camp on Thursday.
yeah, good size, good size, good hands, good feet, good temperament. I mean, that's what you're looking for. Yeah, it's funny about the Stewart kids you brought up real quick. I don't want to make this all a recruiting thing because I want to talk about you in a second, but and just why you got into this. Used to be an oddball profession. Now there's a million guys in it, but um, how do they play that? Explain to people how they play that when a guy might reclassify. That means the urgency. Of course, the urgency's there with him anyway because he's a big time talent. But how did, for example, how will Ohio State play that? I mean, obviously they've offered him, but do they just kind of keep pushing the buttons, and do they, in some form or fashion, if you're thinking about reclassifying, do they urge you to reclassify, or how do they? Explain to people how they may play that.
Yeah, I think obviously, first and foremost, as it is with all these recruiting cases, the Ohio State coaching staff knows much more about what's going on behind the scenes and where the way these are going before even the media does. So I think that's a big thing that impacts how they play it. But but also like you said, Jakeem Stewart's a guy that, regardless of whether Ohio State has 8 defensive linemen committed or 1 defensive lineman committed, they're gonna pursue him as heavily as they can because he's that talented of a guy. Larry Johnson loves him. Like Alan Clark, the assistant defensive line coach, who's a Louisiana native, he loves him as well, and those two have a great relationship. So I think when it gets down to this point, when you're getting to maybe in November, December, when Jakeem Stewart will potentially make a decision about reclassifying, you're looking at a guy that's a numbers buster that you can get on campus for officials. And right now they're battling the likes of LSU, USC, but who knows when he gives the official, okay, I'm reclassifying to 2025. If he does, if whether Georgia, Alabama, some of these other SEC powers get involved just because they have a definite answer. But right now, I think you just proceed as if he's going to be a 2026. You continue building the relationship, and if he jumps up, you have a spot for him because he's that talented and because you like the kid so much. That's why getting him on campus for the camp was so important because you get to find out more about who he is as a person, who he is as a player, and you get to just kind of get a feel for him. But he's not anywhere, from talking to him after the camp, he doesn't seem anywhere close to the decision on reclassifying. It's something that him and his personal trainer, Clyde Alexander, who's a defensive line coach that's worked with a ton of guys in Louisiana, they're working through, they're talking through, but he doesn't have any answer on it. So I don't know if, I doubt Ohio State or any of those programs do, but they just kind of proceed as if we're going to do everything we can to land this talented player, whether it's 2026 or 2025.
Yeah, I was gonna say, man, if you're in the running for a defensive lineman from Louisiana, that means you are a big time school, no matter whether you get them or not. I know Ohio State's been in the running for a couple of guys down there before, but yeah, that's where defensive linemen emanate. I do believe that's like the Big Bang theory, the big man defensive lineman theory comes. The true nasties come from the state of Louisiana. But I digress. One quickie before I move into you. If you could take one player so far who's committed to this 2025 class and go, and this is putting you on the spot, but go, I'm going to build a class around this guy. Who would that player be at this point that's already committed?
I think you'd have to go the two guys that are probably the most vocal when it comes to recruiting others. That's Tavian Sinclair and Devin Sanchez, the 5-star plus cornerback out of Houston, Texas. I mean, Devin's been on campus like probably 100 times. He'll be on campus again in a couple weeks for his official visit. He told me at the 2024 On3 Elite Series that they should put very hard commitment next to his name because he's not going anywhere. And Tavian also had a great quote about loving Ohio State and thinking it's the best program in the country. And he's just hoping to show people that. So those two guys do a great job. I think if you have to pin me down and choose one, I have a better relationship with Tavian. I've known him for a little bit longer, and also he's a quarterback. So I guess if I'm building my class around one of them, I'd probably take Tavian Sinclair, but I think he could land me Devin Sanchez, and then I'm rolling on with both of them.
Okay, let's rewind the tape. I'm going to change the question to one guy on each side of the ball. There you go. I got us both out of trouble there because I would definitely take Devin Sanchez also. He would be in my group. I like the way his dad's involved. I mean,
Yeah, you do
too. I mean, huh?
get his parents, Daniel and D Sanchez, to come help recruit with him if you take him. So that's another good point by you, Mr. May.
Absolutely. I've told his dad that we've commiserated on direct messages a couple of times and stuff. I'm going to have him on my show here one of these days, sooner or later. But and plus I like where he's from, man. I grew up in East Texas, and Channelview's down there, southeast of Houston. I mean, that is big time football played down there, and like Hertz and some of these other guys have come from that area, and it's boy, what a well, when you think about Stewart and where he's from, and Devin Sanchez, I mean, that's boy, you talk about putting a team together. That means your tentacles are pretty much everywhere. My baby brother, who's 66, but he has a weekend ranch in LaGrange, Texas. People know this who follow this show, and of course, he was telling me about J.K. Dobbins before J.K. Dobbins was really on anybody's radar. I remember telling an Ohio State coach about J.K. Dobbins. He goes, "Oh yeah, we're looking at him." I'm going, "Oh my goodness." you know, this is back in the mid 2000 teens, but it is amazing how Ohio State is almost everywhere, right, Mick?
Yeah, but that again, that speaks to having that size of that staff. They have so many guys that if you're not, I mean, what are you doing as a staff to have that many
Right.
not be as early as you can on some of these guys? So obviously, people are doing their jobs at a high level inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Whether it's Ryan Day or the janitor, everybody seems to be rowing in the same direction, pushing towards the same goal, and that's why you get the results that they do.
No, it's funny you brought the janitor up, but Sean, the guy that the facilities operations manager over there, they're all involved, man. They're in meetings. I mean, they want the place to be spick and span when people show up, et cetera. Of course, there's talk they want to build a brand new, almost for want of another term, football facility. Pretty much on the same lot, but over by like maybe east of the east far east grass practice field. But the place is as big as it is, it's busting at the seams in terms of personnel, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's the most interesting thing, getting back into covering Ohio State, and we'll get into more of my path here, but just getting to see some of these guys last weekend at camp, Andy and I had a great, Andy Backstrom and I had a great conversation with Mike Bassford, who was just kind of around and just getting to hear the scope of what he has to deal with, not just football, but they hire a new softball coach last week, and he's the guy that's on top of that, pistol and
Yeah,
rifle, and how he's helped with the wrestling program when it comes to SID, and then we talked about before my shirt right here is Watkins Memorial, and they offered a guy, Jaden Ricketts, out of Pataskala Watkins Memorial last week. But another Pataskala guy is Paul Benedict, who runs all the camps at Ohio State. He does a great job. Saw him at both the camps last week. He'll be at every camp check-in, and then he would go over to the team basketball camp on Friday, and Paul's over there just helping them facilitate that event. So just the size and the scope of the whole Ohio State athletic department and how they have everybody kind of moving is it's awesome to see coming over from a place. I didn't ever live in West Lafayette or Indiana, but I did cover Purdue for a couple of years, and obviously they don't do it up to the scale of Ohio State. Not also primarily because they don't need to, but
right.
just seeing how they operate and seeing how Ohio State operates, it's interesting to see. It's interesting to see from a just an effective scenario, and just seeing how people do business.
Yeah, exactly. Doesn't mean you're going to get everybody, but the way they leave hardly any stone unturned is quite amazing. And I trace much of that back to Mark Pantoni and the organizational aspect of recruiting. I mean, guys before him were good too, but he brought it to another level. I mean, Urban Meyer pretty much turned him loose for a moment, discovered him really, and then kind of turned him loose, set him loose, and everybody has seen the payoffs for that. Speaking of cutting loose and uh, setting someone loose. I covered a Newark Catholic at Watkins Memorial game, I think back in 1977 or something. I called it out on the plains out there. I don't know what y'all call it out there now, but I think the old stadium is still there. It might have been expanded. I think it's at the middle school or something. But the bottom line is you're from that area of Central Ohio, Pataskala, to be specific. What got you into what got you into like wanting to cover recruiting? I mean, I'm telling you, that career path was not there 40 years ago. You understand that, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, so obviously, I mean, like you said, I grew up in Pataskala, I grew up in Central Ohio, so Ohio State sports and everything was always on the TV with my parents. My mom graduated with her accounting degree at Ohio State. My dad attended there for a little while. So that was always something I paid attention to. The bigger thing when I was in my youth was Ohio State basketball, because then you're talking about the Jared Solinger years, the Aaron Kraft years, the John Diebler years of all the success they had in those the late era of Thad Matta. So that was kind of what got me into it. And then as I started to get more and more into the football, just personally, then you started watching it more and more. And then you talk about the Terrell Pryors, the Braxton Millers, that type of era. Uh, Before I even really dug into Ohio State, I was a big fan of some of the guys that Chip Kelly had going at Oregon, who's now the Ohio State offensive coordinator. Whether that's the Anthony Thomas or the Michael James, obviously they had the cool uniforms and the fast players, so everybody liked watching them. But as I kind of got into it more, I got into high school. I did what I hope everybody does now, and I subscribe to a website. I hope you subscribe to Lettermen Row. I think Spencer would tell me to say if you there's a way out there that if you use promo code OSU1, I believe it gets you 2 months for $1. So
Hey,
subscribe to
hey, I always say that's cheaper than Peacock. Now go ahead.
There you go. So that's what I did is I subscribed to Ohio State website. And then I also followed it on 11 Warriors. They're a competitor, but they're a free site and they do great work over there. So that's another one I remember specifically reading about. But just following recruiting on those websites, kind of got into it when I was a kid. I remember I think it was 2013, big year for Florida State recruiting. They landed Jameis Winston, Ronald Darby, Mario Goldman, I believe all
Yeah.
Mario Edwards and some Eddie Goldman on a national signing day in 2013. I remember staying home from school, faking like I was sick to watch it, and watched it for a couple more years. And then I think a handful of years later, 2017 might have been the Nick Petit Ferrer class, I believe, or 2017, 2018, somewhere around there. I
Yeah.
remember my wife staying home. She was actually sick that day, and I just stayed home to watch signing day. And I got her to watch Nick Petit Ferrer's commitment on ESPN, and just always watching that, kind of following it on message boards and whatnot. Once I got out of high school, I started a couple of recruits followed me and I exchanged some messages back and forth with them and I posted it on a message board and everybody liked it. So I continued to try and do it. I got in doing it for $100 a month maybe. And I thought I was the coolest guy in the town of Itasca. And then
Well, wait. You probably were. Now go ahead.
I don't know, your guy's Meyer Shank
Yeah,
Racing.
Mike Shank. Yeah, Mike Shank. He probably holds that title, but go ahead.
Yeah. And then I did actually, I had a short internship with 11 Warriors, who we mentioned earlier, and they taught me a lot. Worked for a couple of different places, and then while I was in college, and I finished that up in about 3 years at Ohio State. And then when I got out, another 247 where I just recently switched over from, they hired me to cover Purdue, and that's where they kind of had an opening at. And then about late last year, I started communicating with Tim Watts, Shannon Terry, some of these guys at On Three about bringing me on to cover Ohio State, and that was always kind of the dream to get back here. My family's here, so making 4 hour drives to Purdue every so often was not the most fun thing. Now I get to make 40-minute drives to Columbus. I get to go to Matt Parker's house, and we get to ride over to Woody to avoid Campus Park, get in my car and stealing my money more since he's got a parking pass. But so that's kind of been the journey to get here, and I'm just happy to be here because it's kind of always been the goal.
Wow. I like the way you went zip there at the end. Um, like I'm saying, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, that wasn't ago. There were like three or four people doing that and stuff. What I wanted to ask you about is how much do you run into other people if you follow my drift? I mean, collide with other people when you're doing your job. There are quite a few, let's put it that recruiting services just covering Ohio State and stuff. Is it tough to navigate from the standpoint of, being in a potential recruit's ear, a prospect's ear? I mean, how tough has it gotten out there in the right out there in the hinterlands?
Yeah, it's totally. You mentioned there's I mean, the Ohio State beat is so vast, and almost every part of it has a recruiting writer, so that makes it more difficult. Obviously, that is not always the most fun where you're trying to reach out to high school kids, and they have just 10 guys alone from Ohio State talking to them. So I think that's another Matt and I trying to balance it, and then Alex as well trying to balance what guys you reach out to, because not
Yeah.
all three of us need to reach out to one of the same guys. So we try and balance that, but yeah, it's an interesting balance of things because you're dealing with high school kids. So I mean, I think doing this and covering high school kids, I think it's very easy to feel entitled to be able to get this information, but it's important for us to remember that like, these are high school kids, and that's really what I love doing it. Like I every year I think between January and May I visited like 40 or 50 high schools because I just like going to see these high school coaches and talk to guys, whether they're Ohio State good or I make trips to Youngstown and Toledo and Cincinnati, Dayton, all these different places because the relationships and the people are the best part of it. So whether that's guys I'm writing against or the high school coaches or the athletes, that's the most interesting part. And so I enjoy that layer of it. And I think that's what hopefully makes me good at my job because I'm really in it for the people. I don't really care about a personal following and I think Matt and I talked about this before I started, but if I wasn't doing this job, I would still be doing what I'm doing right now. I'd just be reading it. So I think that's why any of the thirst I get for Ohio State recruiting or even basketball recruiting information, wrestling, any other sport at Ohio State, I just do that simply because I am interested to find that out for myself. And luckily we have people in the Lettermen Lounge that want to know that information as well, and they read it and they subscribe, and it's really a blessing to be able to do.
Yeah, I was going to say Tom Lemming, one of the originators of covering recruiting. He was a mailman who just did it as a hobby, and next thing you know, it became what it is. Hey, one last thing before we get out of here. Are you, how impressed are you by just uh, the on three dedication to covering recruiting, but also of enlightening prospects, et cetera. You know, they just had that big elite series or whatever it was down in Nashville for some of the elite prospects and stuff, and quite informative in this world where you not only are navigating coaches' offers, you're navigating NIL. Your families are having to come up to speed with everything that's going on in recruiting now, over and above whether you're going to get a chance to play or not.
Yeah, I think what On3 has done is obviously one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to join. I think what they have already together with Shannon Terry at the top, and then so many amazing people all the way down. You have guys like Steve Wiltfong, Chad Simmons that have recruiting knowledge and do it on the day-to-day basis. And then, like you mentioned, that when it comes to On3 Elite, I mean, you've had Pete on before. Pete does a good job with NIL coverage and kind of understanding that skate. But then On3 Elite, you have a guy named Grant Firking who did a great job with his career at Tennessee, played
Yeah.
6 years there, I believe. Went from walk on to one of the most well-known people in the Knoxville area, and him and John Stanton and Morgan Singfried are three people that helped put together this On3 Elite Series in Nashville, and all three of them did a great job facilitating hospitality wise for media, families, and everything. And I think a lot of people see this event and they think it's some big kind of slimy thing that Shannon Terry or some of these On3 people are trying to do just to try and get in the ear of these high school guys. And I tell you, you can bring Marcus Sinclair, who's Tavian Sinclair's dad, on. You can ask Daniel Sanchez about it when he comes on the podcast. Friday when they checked in on, I believe it was Tuesday. When we checked in, I did 12 interviews with 12 different guys, and they had a great media day. They had a ton of different things, this kind of set up orientation. They had a pool party. They had a nice dinner that night, and that was kind of the welcome to it all. But then on the next day, you had guys, they were in meetings for 8 hours, 8 hours with different people, whether it's former NFL athletes, agents, different stuff, trying to educate them on stuff. And you have all these guys. I imagine if I called Tavian right now, he could show me a notepad of things that he wrote down during that series. And they really are just trying to educate guys and prepare them for this opportunity because, like Shannon talked about, like Will Compton, who's a guy that does a great podcast with the Bustin' with the Boys, I believe is the title of it.
Yeah.
And he did a great job down there and just talking about the short shelf life of athletes and trying to capitalize on it, whether you're in college or the NFL. And I think coming away from Nashville, I thought it was an amazing event. I thought going into it was going to be cool to see. And everything I saw in Nashville blew me out of the water. Everything I've seen from kind of what Shannon has for the view of On3, whether that's On3 her and some of these five goats, some of these different verticals that he's developed at On3 are awesome. And I think the future of it with everything that's coming together is awesome. And I'm happy to be a part of it. I'm happy to be helping grow Lettermen Row. I'm excited to be inside the Lettermen Lounge. Like I said, again, $2 for 1 month for $2. Code OSU1 can get you signed up and subscribed. That's the YouTube special for the Tim May show. But yeah, I'm excited to be able to be a part of it. Excited to be here on the Tim May show, doing different stuff with Matt. We have 2 more camps this week, official visits next weekend, 2 more camps the week after that, and we'll roll into June and July and August, where Matt and I will Matt and I were just hammering out our football schedule, where we're going to see every in-state commit and every guy in the state of Ohio that has a holds an Ohio State offer. We'll probably see several of them in July heading into the season. So we're just kind of picking up from here. Obviously, you got your team coverage is going to be coming. Spencer and Andy are killing it. Alex is doing a great job as well. And then you never know when you're going to get a Steve Wiltfong or a Chad Simmons in the Letterman Lounge, or even a Pete Nakos dropping some scoops. So there's
Yeah.
great things building it On3 and with Lettermen Row.
Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, he has no opinion. Hey, Mick Walker, thanks for joining me, my man. That was fun. We'll do it again, brother. And keep Pataskala strong. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, I will. I told you I gotta stop by and see your guys at Meyer Shank Racing. I got the Watkins Memorial on. Jaden Ricketts, 2026 wide receiver over at Pataskala Watkins Memorial, got an offer from Ohio State last week. So congrats to Jaden. I graduated high school with his sister. So congrats to Jada, his family, his father. All of them are great people over there. I'm happy to be repping Watkins. I'm happy to be on the Tim May show. And thanks for having me on, Tim.
Yeah, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, he doesn't just cover football recruiting. I mean, he's got his hands in a lot of things. Isn't that right, Mick? Well, you're just like a jack of all trades when it comes to recruiting coverage, correct?
Yeah, and that's the awesome part of having Matt and already on here full time doing a great job, and Alex contributing when he can. There's a lot of coverage already being done by Ohio State, along with guys like Chad and Steve. So if we have that ability to be able to cover a little more basketball, because you have Jake Dealer doing a great job in state, you have Bill Mosiello, the baseball coach, building together a great program, and Tom Ryan, the wrestling coach, who's always done a great job building up the wrestling program and recruiting at a high level. Kevin McGuff, who's doing a good
Yeah.
job recruiting at a high level and with the women's program, and everybody deserves a little bit of coverage. And you'll see a lot of that early next week, probably right around this time, because June 15th is a big day for all three of those programs to be able to contact 2026 recruits, and we'll have more on that in the Letterman Lounge and discussions on that, along with official visit coverage and camp coverage as well.
Mick Walker, thanks for joining the Tim May Show. And ladies and gentlemen, until next week, we'll see you then.